Hello, my name is Kyle Thalman. Over the last 12 years of coaching and running spotting clinics, I've seen a wide variety of spotting techniques, some of which were highly inefficient and downright dangerous for the athlete as well as the spotter. My experience started with competitive gymnastics at level 4, where I progressed all the way up through level 10. While I was at the University of Hawaii, I was a lead cheerleader and I studied mechanical engineering with an emphasis on biomechanics. Now I'd like to share my knowledge and experience and help make tumbling and gymnastics safer for everyone. Before we get started, we're going to cover some basic concepts of spotting, followed by some safety tips. After that, we're going to dive right into the standing tumbling section, followed by the running section. The first goal in spotting is to keep the athlete safe. This way they can take as many turns as they need to figure out the skill. The second goal of spotting is to keep the spotter safe. If the spotter isn't safe, the athlete can't be safe. Third goal in spotting is to teach the skill. Do not sacrifice the safety of the athlete or your own safety to try and teach a skill. The most important part of the body is the head and neck. If an athlete lands on their head, it's the most likely to cause a catastrophic injury. The next most important part of the body is the chest and abdomen. Any extreme impact to this area could cause serious injury. After the torso, the next areas of concern are the shoulders, the elbows, the wrists, and then the fingers, as well as on the lower body, the hips, the knees, the ankles, and then the toes. Keeping the hierarchy of body parts in mind, if you have to sacrifice an elbow or a shoulder to save the head and neck, that's what you should do. I've seen a lot of beginning coaches attempt to spot with their hips and their shoulders away from the athlete's center of gravity. This can cause severe injury to the spotter. The best way to spot is to keep your hips and your shoulders close to the athlete's center of gravity so you have a more powerful position to spot. Most skills you'll find yourself spotting, you will need to lift the athlete with one hand. This hand should be close to their center of gravity. When spotting a skill that you need to rotate the athlete quickly, placing the rotating hand away from their center of gravity will give you more leverage to rotate them quickly. If you're new to spotting and unsure which side you should stand on, make sure you're having the athlete tumble toward your dominant hand. If you have access to an athlete that can already perform the skill, I highly suggest that you practice your spotting skills on them. Just be aware that when you move to a less capable athlete, they will most likely be lower and slower and you will have to catch some weight. If you're serious about becoming a professional spotter, you may consider taking up juggling. It sounds a little bit weird, but it became much easier to spot when I learned how to juggle. This increases your eye-hand coordination immensely and makes spotting much easier. Now that you have an understanding of the basic concepts, we can move on to the safety tips. Never spot something if you don't feel safe spotting. Ask for help. If you're spotting a very large athlete, you may consider using a buddy. For your skills you're less confident with, use progression drills. This way you can warm up your spotting techniques and keep the athlete safe. Always build trust with your athlete. Never fake spot, meaning if you've told your athlete you're going to spot, you will spot them that turn. Never spot if you're too tired. When spotting an athlete you've never worked with before, assume that they cannot complete the skill by themselves and will need a heavy spot. Make sure your area is clear of athletes or equipment before you spot. Make sure the athlete and the spotter aren't wearing any jewelry that could get caught while performing the skill. In case of a medical emergency, know where your med kits are and have a plan of action. Never spot alone in the gym with just you and your athlete. It's inappropriate. Accidents happen. If your hand hits an inappropriate area on your athlete, do not ignore it. Acknowledge the fact that it happened, say you're sorry, and then get back to the skill. Now that we've finished with the safety tips, we can get started with the standing tumbling. The handstand is one of the most basic skills and has no prerequisites to spot. First, have your athlete start in a lunge and place your dominant hand palm up on their stomach. As the athlete kicks up, place your other hand on their lower back. With your hands in this position, it gives you control of their body and protects their head and neck. To work up to a full handstand, you can have the athlete complete a partial handstand so you can get the idea of the weight transfer and the balance point of the skill. A beginning athlete may not have the strength to hold their entire weight in a handstand, so you must be ready to catch their weight in case their arms collapse. Once you're sure the athlete can hold their entire weight, you can move your hands up their body and let them balance between your hands. That's all for the handstand. This is a very basic skill, so you'll need to master this one to move on to harder and bigger skills. Now that we've finished with the handstand, let's move on to the forward roll. The forward roll is a very basic skill and requires no prerequisites for spotting. First, have your athlete start with their feet together and their arms up and place your non-dominant hand palm up on their stomach. As the athlete places their hands on the ground, place your dominant hand on the back of their neck. This hand placement gives you control of their body and protects their head and neck. As the athlete rolls over, you need to lift up on their hips and push their head under so that they miss landing on their head and put all their weight on their shoulders, protecting their head and neck. Make sure the athlete can clear their head before you push their hips over. Sometimes an inexperienced athlete will drop right to their head. You need to lift up on their hips to prevent this. Once they have rolled over, you can help the athlete up to their feet by pushing on their back. Once the athlete gains more experience, you can use the same spotting technique with less force until they can try by themselves. Now that we have figured out the forward roll, we can move on to the backward roll. The backward roll is also a basic skill and requires no other prerequisites to spot. First, have the athlete start with their feet together and their arms bent so their hands are just behind their neck. Place your dominant hand on their hands on top of their neck. This gives you control of their upper body, keeping their head and neck safe. As they squat down, place your non-dominant hand on the back of their knee. As they roll back and the weight begins to transfer to their neck, you need to use your dominant hand to lift up on their neck to take the pressure off of that joint. If the athlete needs help rotating over, you can lift up on the back of their knees with your non-dominant hand. The absolute critical factor here is to make sure the athlete does not roll directly over the head, which can cause large amounts of stress on their neck and lead to injury. If the athlete begins to pull their hands off of the ground, you need to stop the roll and grab their shins. Continue to spot the athlete's neck until you can feel that they have enough strength to push themselves over without your assistance safely. Now that we understand the backward roll, we can move on to the front walkover. The prerequisite for spotting a front walkover is being able to spot a handstand. First, have your athlete start in a lunge and place your non-dominant hand palm up on their stomach. As they kick up, you'll place your dominant hand on their lower back. As they kick over, you can slowly lower their feet to the ground by lifting up on their lower back. Once the athlete's feet land, you can move your non-dominant hand to their upper arm and assist them in standing up. Most children do not have the abdominal strength to support their lower back in this position, so you will need to apply adequate lifting force to take the pressure off their lower back. As the athlete gets more experienced, you can use the same spotting techniques with less force. Once you're certain they can make it over without your help, you can let them try by themselves. Now that we've mastered the front walkover, let's move on to the back walkover. Prerequisite for the back walkover is also being able to spot a handstand. Have your athlete start with their feet apart, place your dominant hand on their upper back near their shoulders, and your other hand on their lower back. As they lean back, most children do not have the abdominal strength to support their lower back in this position. You will need to apply adequate lifting force to take the pressure off their lower back. Make sure you lower their hands slowly to the ground. As they lean back, you can place your non-dominant hand on their calf. Once their hands are down, you can help them kick over by lifting up on their lower back and throwing their legs over their head. Once their feet land, you can help them stand up by lifting up on their upper arm. Now that you know how to spot a back walkover, we can move on to the cartwheel. The prerequisite skill for the cartwheel is being able to spot a handstand. Have the athlete start in a lunge. You need to be on the front leg side in order to spot the cartwheel. Once you're on the side of the athlete's front leg, you can place the hand that's closest to them, palm up on their hip. As they kick over, immediately place your other hand on their other hip. With your hands in this position, you can lift up on their hips and keep their head and neck safe. An inexperienced athlete may not have the strength to hold themselves in a handstand, so you must be ready to catch their whole weight in case their arms collapse. To work up to a full cartwheel, you can have the athlete complete a partial cartwheel where their legs kick over the side and don't put their full weight on their arms. Continue spotting until you're sure the athlete can hold their entire weight through the entire skill before letting them try by themselves. Now that you understand how to spot a cartwheel, we can move on to the standing back handspring. Prerequisites for spotting a back handspring are being able to spot both a handstand and a back walkover. Because the back handspring is a more dynamic skill, it has a higher degree of difficulty when spotting. If you are spotting a smaller athlete, you may choose to spot on your knees. If you're spotting on your knees, start by placing your dominant hand on their lower back. If you're spotting a taller athlete, you want to keep your legs wide and reach your dominant hand all the way across to the other hip. For large and small athletes, next you'll place your non-dominant hand on the back of their knee. As the athlete begins to jump, you will need to immediately start lifting with your dominant hand. Next, you will use your non-dominant hand to lift up on the back of their knee and help them flip over. As the athlete prepares to jump, you will feel the hips lower and then rise on the jump. If you do not feel the hips rise on the jump, then the athlete will not have enough room to clear their head and will need you to lift their hips high enough so that they can have straight arms through the flip. When spotting a larger athlete, you may want to put your leg behind them. This way you can put your elbow on your hip and get better leverage as you lift them through the skill. Some inexperienced athletes may jump forward during this skill. Be prepared and keep your body close to them so you can spot them safely through the skill. If you're new to spotting, try a few repetitions where you hold the athlete in the air and let them perform the back handspring slowly. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Once you've mastered the standing back handspring, we can move on to the standing back tuck. The prerequisite for spotting the standing back tuck is being able to spot the handstand, the backward roll, the back walkover, and the back handspring. Because the standing back tuck has a lot of height and rotation, it is a much higher degree of difficulty when spotting. Make sure you're very confident in spotting the standing back handspring before you attempt spotting the standing back tuck. Start with your legs wide and place your dominant hand on their lower back. As the athlete jumps, use your non-dominant hand to catch the back of their knees and throw their legs over. You will need to use your dominant hand to lift the athlete in the air until they can bring their legs around and land on their feet. If the athlete is flipping much too slowly, you may wish to stop them in a cradle. Move your dominant hand up to their shoulders and get your hips under them to catch their entire weight. If you feel the athlete opening up midway through the skill, you will need to throw harder with your non-dominant hand to get their feet under them before they land. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Now that we've finished with all the standing tumbling, let's review a few concepts before we begin into the running tumbling. Now we're going to go over the running tumbling section, but before we do, we'd like to give you a few things to keep in mind while you're spotting running tumbling skills. When you're spotting running tumbling skills, the athletes are going to have a lot more power. To reduce the chance of injury, you're going to want to do a lot of repetitions on your progression drills. Before attempting to spot a running tumbling skill, make sure your athlete can hit the exact same location every turn. To help them with this, you can use markers, chalk marks, bean bags to help them get more consistent in their length of tumbling. Never spot a running tumbling pass on your knees. This severely limits your mobility and can lead to a missed spot. When you're spotting a running tumbling skill, the best place to look is at the athlete's center of gravity. This is where you're going to need to place your dominant hand and lift the athlete during the skill. Keeping these ideas in mind, now let's go over the running tumbling section. Now let's take a look at the running tumbling skills. Make sure you are very confident in spotting the cartwheel before moving on to the running aerial. If you haven't already watched the cartwheel section, I highly suggest you go back and review that. The technique for spotting an aerial is exactly the same as spotting a cartwheel, except it's faster. The main difference in spotting an aerial is the speed at which you need to get your body and hands into position. Make sure you get your body just in front of the athlete after their hurdle and get your first hand on their hip before their back leg comes up. If you do not feel the hips rise on the takeoff, you must lift their hips so that the athlete can clear their head. The good thing about spotting aerials is you can have the athlete perform running cartwheels until you can lift them high enough so that they miss their hands. If the athlete doesn't hurdle in the correct spot, you will need to quickly move your body so that you're just in front of their front leg at the end of their hurdle. To make it easier to spot, you can place markers on the floor to allow the athlete to know where to hurdle and place their front foot for the aerial. Once you can consistently spot a no-hands cartwheel, you can move on to the full aerial. The progression of spotting should go as follows. First, a standing cartwheel, then a running cartwheel, then a running no-hands cartwheel, then finally a running aerial. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Now that you can spot a running aerial, let's move on to the running front tuck. The prerequisite for the front tuck is being able to spot a forward roll. Because the front tuck is a skill with a lot of height and rotation, use some landing mats in case of hard landings for the athlete. You want to have your body just in front of the athlete as they punch for the front tuck. As the athlete approaches, hold out your non-dominant hand. When the athlete punches, place your non-dominant hand on their stomach. Because the athlete is not using their hands on this flip, you will need to lift up on their hips during takeoff. Just after the takeoff, you will place your dominant hand on their back. Use your dominant hand to rotate them and protect their head and neck. As the athlete is opening up to land, you can use your dominant hand to finish rotating them or to catch them if they are rotating too fast. To practice your spotting skills, you can have the athlete perform a low dive roll onto a mat. The progression of spotting goes as follows. First, forward roll, then dive roll, and then the front tuck. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Now that we've finished with the running front tuck, let's take a look at the roundoff back handspring. Because the running roundoff back handspring is a highly dynamic skill with a lot of height and rotation, make sure you are very confident with the standing back handspring before attempting to spot this skill. If you have not seen the chapter regarding the standing back handspring, I highly suggest you go back and review that before continuing on. Before spotting a roundoff back handspring, make sure the athlete can consistently do a roundoff in the exact same location every single time. To make this easier, you can place markers where the athlete needs to hurdle and where they should put their hands for the roundoff. Now that the athlete is doing a consistent roundoff, we need to get your body in position. Make sure you are just behind the athlete as they land the roundoff, ready to catch their weight in case they don't jump. Next, we will practice getting your dominant hand on the lower back of the athlete just as they finish the roundoff. For larger athletes, you may consider stepping your foot behind them as they finish the roundoff to give you better leverage while you spot the skill. Next, you should start spotting the roundoff back handspring with a pause between the roundoff and the back handspring. The most critical factor in spotting the roundoff back handspring is being prepared to catch the entire weight of the athlete immediately after the roundoff. The progression for spotting the roundoff back handspring is as follows. First, a roundoff placing your hand on the lower back, then a roundoff getting your leg behind them, then a roundoff back handspring with a pause, and then finally, the full roundoff back handspring. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Once you've mastered the round-off back handspring, we can take a look at the round-off back handspring tuck. Because the round-off back handspring tuck is a highly dynamic skill, make sure you are very confident in spotting both the round-off back handspring and the standing tuck before moving on to spotting the round-off back handspring tuck. Before spotting the round-off back handspring tuck, make sure the athlete can complete the round-off back handspring in the exact same location every single try. Again, we will use markers on the floor to show the athlete where they need to hurdle and place their hands on the floor for the round-off back handspring to get a consistent length and make sure they land exactly in the same spot every time. Now that the athlete is doing a consistent round-off back handspring, we need to practice getting your body in the right place. Make sure as soon as they are finishing the round-off back handspring, your hips are in close and you are right behind them. The critical factor in spotting a round-off back handspring tuck is making sure your body is in place, right out of the back handspring, and ready to catch the entire athlete's weight. First, you want to be able to consistently get your dominant hand on their lower back and your non-dominant hand catching the back of their knees. You can practice getting your dominant hand on their lower back by spotting the rebound out of a round-off back handspring. A good way to prepare for spotting for the tuck is to spot a double back handspring. While spotting the double back handspring, lift up slightly on the second back handspring. Once you can consistently lift the athlete in a second back handspring, you can move on to spotting the round-off back handspring tuck, making sure you spot both the back handspring and the tuck. Once you can consistently get your body and hands in place, you can move on to spotting the back tuck without spotting the back handspring. The progression skills for a round-off back handspring tuck are as follows. Start off by spotting a round-off back handspring rebound. Then move on to spotting a round-off double back handspring where you spot both back handsprings. After this, do a few tries where you spot a round-off double back handspring, spotting both back handsprings, but on the second back handspring, lift up slightly so there's less pressure on their hands. Once you can do this, spot a round-off back handspring tuck where you spot both the back handspring and the tuck. After that, you can finally move on to spotting a round-off back handspring tuck where you only spot the back tuck. As the athlete becomes more proficient in the skill, you can use less and less force, but keep your hands on the athlete. Continue spotting until the athlete can complete several consistent repetitions of the skill with no force applied by the spotter. A good rule of thumb is to spot 5 additional repetitions of the skill, even though you are certain that the athlete can complete the skill by themselves safely. Thanks for watching. I hope you can apply these techniques in this DVD to make yourself a better spotter. Always remember to use skill progressions, ask for help if you need it, and keep you and your athletes safe at all times.